All right, let's talk a little NBA basketball. The Thunder got back into the series last night in the Western Conference. They won Game 3. They now trail 2-1. Joined right now by Jacob Noble from the ProBasketballTalk.com. Jacob, good to have you on the program. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on, Travis.
Good. It's good to have you, Jacob. So I don't think anybody thought that the Spurs were able to go through the entire postseason without losing a game. It finally happened. They'd won 20 in a row. They'd won 32 of 34 before losing last night. Before we talk about last night, try to put into perspective just how amazing of a run that was.
Oh, it's fantastic considering, they really were trying to tank a few games towards the end of the season there that, Greg Popovich was trying to rest up his starters for the playoffs because he's a coach that understands the big picture. And for them to go on a feat that they did was truly remarkable considering every other team, towards the end was just resting up. They kind of had their spots in place. They didn't think Oklahoma was going to fall from the first seed, and they ended up doing so. And that might actually be the difference in the series.
Do you think so? Do you think that this thing could be a 7-game series and that last game in San Antonio might be the difference?
If the Oklahoma Thunder play the defense they played in Game 3 and they need it from everybody, then yes. But I don't think it's going to happen. I still see the Spurs closing this out in 5 or 6.
We're talking with Jacob Noble. He is the founder of the ProBasketballTalk.com. You can also follow him on Twitter at ProBSKBLL Talk. They made an adjustment. Scotty Brooks made an adjustment last night. They put Thabo Sefolosha on Tony Parker. How big was that? How big of a decision was that to put a big guy on Parker like that?
Oh, that's a huge move, and I thought they would actually take Kevin Durant and stick him on Manu a little bit more than they did. You got guys with size when you have Sefolosha and Kevin Durant. Both of them got wingspans within the 6'8" to 7-foot range. So if you have a tall guy like that, it can really disrupt the shooter. Ability to shoot over a tall guy and also to get around because we're talking about two guards here in Durant and Sefolosha that aren't. They're not heavyweight. They're not slow. They're very quick guards, so they can get back in position if they gamble here and there. But that's definitely a smart move, and now it's going to be interesting to see what Greg Popovich does to counteract that.
Jacob, it's interesting to talk about Russell Westbrook because he's such a dynamic player. He's so strong. He's able to get to the hoop. He's a pretty good shooter at times. But do the Thunder need him to be more of what he was last night? Not a guy who's taking a ton of shots, not a guy who's scoring a lot of points, but a guy who's dropping a lot of assists and getting a lot of other people involved.
Well, typically that's the argument with the Thunder, and a lot of Thunder fans and the media scrutinize the shot selection with Russell Westbrook. And it's not the amount of shots that I have an issue with, it's just the shot selection. And if he's being aggressive, getting to the lane, that creates spacing for him to make those passes if the defense collapses well enough. And last night we saw the Spurs defense just was not existent. They couldn't get into a rhythm offensively, and I think that affected them defensively as well, and the Thunder took advantage of it. So to answer your question, I think it helps the Thunder, but it's more so not shot amount, but rather shot selection that will benefit Russell Westbrook in the long run.
Jacob, you think that Greg Popovich and his guys right now are sweating this at all? Or they've been through this so many times. They got their clocks clean last night. It happens when you're playing a good team. Every once in a while, you're going to get beat. Do they just come back in Game 4 and bounce back like nothing even happened?
I think they do, and Greg Popovich is one of the coaches, and I was kind of thinking about this before we hopped on the air here, is that, most other coaches would get scrutinized for taking out their players in a playoff game where they still technically had a shot to win, although they were down a pretty hefty deficit, but he took his starters and sat them on the bench for most of the fourth quarter and threw out his bench and just said, we're basically taking the L on this game and we're going to move on and get ready for Game 4.
I totally agree, Jacob, and you saw what he did last night where he emptied his bench and Duncan and Parker didn't play the last 15 minutes of the game. If that were, for instance, say, Vinny Del Negro, the world would have come unhinged, but because it's Popovich and because he had so much success resting his guys during the regular season, managing their minutes, everybody kind of shrugs their shoulders and says, yeah, Pop knows what he's doing.
And absolutely, and I love that you brought up the Vinny Del Negro because that's a perfect example, Travis, because we saw that game where Chris Paul was, going to be benched. They were down by double digits to Memphis, and Chris Paul begged them to put him back in, and look what ended up happening. They ended up winning that game, and eventually they ended up winning the series against Memphis. So you saw how that one played out, and, we can play the scenario that if you just sat Chris Paul, took the loss, Memphis might have advanced to the second round. But going back to Popovich for a second here, I think he sat Duncan and Parker so early because he realized he played them more minutes than he'd like to in the first few games. Duncan was getting up to the 35 minutes per game. He usually likes from around the 30 range. So you might have thought that he gave Duncan a little more work in the first couple of games of San Antonio. Plus, with the other circumstances at hand with the game so far away from them, he thought it was best just to give the big guys some rest.
We're talking with Jacob Noble. He is the founder of the ProBasketballTalk.com. Jacob, going to the other side, going to the Eastern Conference for a minute. The Celtics threw a pretty good punch in Game 2. Rajon Rondo was as good as you're going to see anybody play in the postseason. They still came up a little short. Any scenario, any chance, any sort of strategy that you can think of that's going to allow the Celtics to get back into this series?
I'm going to steal some words right out of Doc Rivers' mouth, because I was on a conference call with him and the rest of the media yesterday, and he said, they're chipping at the wall, and they're just chipping, and they're gaining ground, and eventually they're going to knock it down. And whether that means it's 1 win, 2 wins, make this a 7-game series, possibly take the series, that's still left to be determined. I'm a little more on the pessimistic side, where I don't think the Celtics are going to win this series. I don't think many people have the Celtics winning the series outside of delusional Boston fans, but we know how that fan base can get from time to time. I think a couple of wins will be a moral victory for the Celtics, and I know moral victories don't really mean much, but they're just outmatched right now, and the Heat are playing fantastic basketball there. They're not settling for three-point shots. You have Wade and LeBron swearing off hero ball, and they're playing together for the first time since they've been together, really. We're so used to seeing one or the other dominate, but when you got both of them just taking over the game, there's not much you can do, especially for an injury-prone team like the Celtics, who are just missing so many players that they could use, such as Avery Bradley and obviously the Jeff Green story that was a heartbreaker in the beginning of the year.
Jacob, what do you do if you're the Celtics with Rajon Rondo? There were rumors that before the trading deadline that they were trying to move him, that they weren't terribly happy with his attitude and that he wasn't a good fit with some of the other things they had. But you look at that team, he's clearly their best player. He's clearly their most valuable asset at this point. What are they going to do with him?
The whole Rondo thing is fascinating because people get way over their heads. When Danny Ainge, admitted that he offered Rajon Rondo, he's talking about he offered him for Chris Paul, possibly one or two of the only other guards better than Rajon Rondo there. So of course you'd offer that trade. If you could offer Rajon Rondo for LeBron James, you'd do that. You offer your best for something better. But people have this illusion that Rondo's such a bad person. He's such a bad locker room guy. He's such a bad character that the Celtics need to do something with him. And I don't think so. Rondo has the attitude that he wants to win. So all these stories we hear with the Snapple bottle throwing at the television in a film session, that's aggravation because he wants to win. Not aggravation because people aren't listening to him, because people aren't doing what he's saying. He wants to be leader, but he wants to win. And I said it great the other night. He would trade his 44-point game in Game 2 for a 6-point performance, 10 assists, and a win. He'd do it every day of the week. He doesn't care about the 44 points. As you said after the game, it was a loss. None of this matters.
We're talking with Jacob Noble from the ProBasketballTalk.com. Jacob, one last question before I let you go. What have you made of the officiating in that series so far? Has it affected the outcome of the series, or is it they're missing some calls in some crucial spots, but that's just the rub of the way that it goes sometimes? You get some, you miss some.
I think you get some, you miss some. You can't sit there and point fingers because you're never going to fix your mistakes. And although the officiating has mistakes and there's nothing anybody can do about that outside the NBA front office, you as a team have to look at what you are doing wrong and what you can improve on. You can say some comments and maybe correct officiating here and there, but you're only going to end up getting fined. The officials are going to do what they do. They're going to call the calls that they see that they feel right, or whatever direction might be given to them from up above. But as a team, we could point out 5 or 10 reasons why the Celtics lost in those 2 games. We could point out other reasons why the Spurs lost last night. Officiating is a factor, but it's not the number one factor.
Jacob, how many games do the Celtics win in this series?
I got the Celtics winning 1 game, and I think they win tonight's game, and then I think Miami comes back and closes it out with 5.
That is Jacob Noble. He is the founder of the ProBasketballTalk.com. Jacob, good to have you back on the show. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Travis.
You got it.